Thank you for joining us for today's presentation, Powering Talent Management in the Energy Sector. Today's presentation will be led by Brian Kimball and will cover the characteristics of energy sector companies, challenges to a successful TMS deployment, and key technology decision drivers. Before I turn it over to Brian, there's just a bit of information that I would like to share with you about H-Architect. There's a quick agenda slide for you. All right, founded in 1997, H-Architect is an end-to-end human capital management consulting firm. We have a broad range of clients who've utilized our services as part of more than 2,000 projects. We're headquartered in Frisco, Texas, just a few minutes north of Dallas, but we have offices located throughout the United States and Canada. H-Architect's consulting service encompasses the full life cycle of an HCM system, everything from the upfront strategy that outlines the systems an organization has currently and what types of systems they will need to add or replace in the future, through evaluation and selection of new systems, and implementation work, both technical configuration and implementation project management. As you can see here, it does cover the full life cycle, with also between those steps we can assist with a number of other areas such as ROI business case justification, process redesign and optimization, change management, and system integration and administration. H-Architect consultants have worked with all major types of HCM systems, from talent acquisition through workforce planning. You can see those types of systems here. At this point, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Brian Kimball. Brian currently serves as H-Architect's Vice President of Talent Management Systems Consulting, and Brian has extensive experience, over 18 years, assisting clients with project management, functional consulting, and training. Brian's a true thought leader in the space, having published a number of articles on how to successfully manage HR technology projects. And with that, Brian, I'm turning it over to you, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, and hello, everyone. Today we are going to be focusing on characteristics of the energy sector and what those characteristics mean in terms of talent management systems, pain points, things to be aware of, as well as technology drivers that need to be at the center and the forefront in order to ensure that you have a successful implementation and adoption of your system. The content from this particular session is actually informed from the number of clients that we have worked with over the last several years that have gone down the talent management system road, either trying to deploy full suite solutions or partial suite solutions. And as we've worked with these companies, we have noticed that there are several characteristics that are pretty well common to these organizations, and they're certainly not, unique to the energy sector, although the combination of these characteristics oftentimes, creates more of a unique environment. But certainly some of the things that I mentioned will be applicable to organizations that are outside of the energy sector. What we want to look at first is the characteristics that we typically see, and then from there we'll move into the deployment issues that these create. One of the first things that I want to point out is that the energy sector companies have very diverse workforces. On the one hand, they've got an aging workforce, a lot of people who've been with the company for 15, 20, 25 years, held the same jobs for oftentimes lengthy periods of time. And then you've got a lot of what we call green grads, people straight out of university, college, that are stepping into key roles. We've got a odd combination of high and low tech in terms of the workforce. The field oftentimes having very limited computer skills, and the more high tech skills being fairly confined to specific sectors of the organization. And we've got we see oftentimes that what is really a missing mid-level. So we've got an older workforce, we've got a young workforce, and the mid-level is kind of thin, and that obviously creates problems. We see within these companies oftentimes that a lot of the processes are fairly out of date, archaic, and very disparate. left hand not really knowing what the right hand is doing. And I think, again, a lot of that comes from the fact that there is a workforce that's been in place for quite some time. The energy sector companies that we've worked with tend to have a lot of remote locations, referred to as the field, where the field may be in some town in Wyoming, or it could be in Ulaanbaatar, but people working in remote locations where sometimes access to technology is a problem. Because of the remote nature and the diversity, oftentimes we see that the access to the company's infrastructure is somewhat limited. Oftentimes just to corporate and to key people in the field, whereas the majority of the employee populace doesn't necessarily have a lot of access to the systems that are used. Contractors play a significant role in many of our clients in this sector, especially during peak periods where they need to bring in a workforce to manage something for perhaps a 6-week or a 12-week period and then let them go again. So that creates some unique issues. We have also found that this sector of organizations, probably more so than most of the clients that we work with, is very concerned about regulatory compliance and audits. Because of the stiffness of the fines, because of the perception within the marketplace, because of the fact that their license could be revoked to even work in certain countries. There's a lot of sensitivity to audits. The other thing that we've noticed, and the last thing I want to point out from a sort of a general characteristics perspective, is that these companies, again, more so than most organizations that we work with, in fact, I can't think of a single energy sector company that I've worked with that does not practice position control and very granular level, tying positions to the org structure and being very aware of workforce planning and budget compliance. Again, because I think a lot of this is driven from the volatility within this particular sector in terms of market prices of energy and things like that, but very, very detailed when it comes to position control. These characteristics do create or present some unique challenges to successfully deploy a talent management system. And when I talk about successful deployment of a system, what I mean by that is not only have you put the system in and configured it and signed off on it, but it's actually being used and adopted in the way that was originally envisioned when you put together your business case way back at the beginning and said that by putting in this particular talent management system and these modules, here's the return that we can expect, and if it's used this way. A lot of companies put in technology, but then people don't use it properly. Or they don't use it at all. So we're talking about deploying successfully and the challenges that this particular culture does create. So I want to first of all talk about the technological challenges that these companies face as they look at deploying a talent management system. And I've picked out 4. There are probably more, but these are 4 of the more common challenges and obviously relate to what we discussed on the previous panel. Access to the system in remote locations is a challenge. A lot of my clients, when they send people overseas to work in the outback of Australia or in parts of China or Mongolia or Indonesia or wherever it might be, they send these individuals out with iPads and things like that, and access to the system in these areas is problematic if the technology doesn't support that. The limited computer skills in the field. Some of my clients in this sector have 80% of their employees deployed into the field, and many of them are in jobs that really don't require technology skills, and therefore the individuals that are hired don't necessarily have a lot of computer skills. And now all of a sudden you're deploying a system that has a huge footprint that touches pretty well every employee within the organization. So the limited computer skills creates problems. The lack of access to the IT infrastructure, somewhat related to the above two items, but again, this creates a problem, especially if you're trying to control access through single sign-on or restrict access accordingly. The infrastructure restrictions become problematic. And the fourth area that I see from a technological perspective that is really challenging for these organizations is the fact that, again, because of the nature of the workforce, because of the disparate processes, we see a lot of siloed solutions, independent solutions. It's always interesting when you begin to do a deployment and you start to dig under the surface to find out what really exists out there in the IT landscape that people have developed or purchased without anyone really knowing about it. There are a lot of siloed solutions and a lot of processes that people have used for some time and are hesitant to get rid of, which brings us to the cultural challenges that energy sector companies face when they look at deploying a talent management system or some of its modules. We've found that there is what I like to call organizational inertia within these companies. It comes from the fact that you've had people that have held the same jobs, have done it the certain way for a long time and have never really been challenged on it, and there's always other things that are higher priorities. There is just a lot of inertia that you have to overcome. In fact, one of my clients referred to their workforce as a coddled workforce. They had a culture of coddling or babying, not really forcing change, letting people do things their own way, and doing a lot of hand-holding. It was interesting working with one client that I worked with, that the amount of change management and training that they were trying to envision, and the wave after wave to be able to try to support people's unwillingness to adopt a new system. So you've got a cultural problem with this type of a workforce that makes it difficult to implement. There are limited technology adopters within these companies, and obviously when you're putting in new technology and you have a shortage of people that are willing to embrace technology, that does create a problem. And obviously protection to turf. I've done it this way for so long, and no one's ever really challenged me on it, and I've spent a lot of time developing this framework and this process and this system, and I don't want to let it go. These are the kinds of challenges more from an organizational culture perspective that need to be addressed. And part of this is coupled with the fact that many of the individuals work out in remote locations. They're kind of on their own to some extent. There are two other challenges that I want to at least identify because, and again, understanding that these are by no means unique to the energy sector companies. They just tend to be very common within these organizations. Budget issues are pretty substantial. Budgets can be slashed based upon what the market is doing very rapidly. There's much more volatility, and it's harder to plan for that. And therefore, even when you're putting a project team together, I found that oftentimes these projects are very thinly resourced. The number of people that can be dedicated to the project can sometimes, individuals can be pulled off in short order to resource other more immediate things that have to do with the actual business of energy. So these are the challenges that face us as we look to evaluate, select, and to deploy a talent management system. Based upon that, when we work with our clients, we like to help them define and understand what are the key drivers that they need to keep in mind as they do move forward in looking at systems or putting them in. And again, these drivers are drivers that are relevant for other companies as well, but certainly very relevant when you're within the energy sector. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about some of these. The first one is, due to the remote nature of these organizations in the field, and the fact that infrastructure oftentimes does not really reach out to some of the regions that they're working, having applications that are mobile enabled is critical. So how well will the application actually work on an iPad or a smartphone, a mobile device? If it doesn't, you will have challenges. I have clients that, I have one client that is a big global mining operation, and when they send out their people out into the field, the expectation is that they're going to be able to do their work on a mobile device. And so when you're asking employees to do to enroll in training courses or to provide peer review for the performance process or whatever it might be? Can they do it on their mobile device, or do they have to access a PC? Usability and an intuitive user interface is critical. This is a system that, depending upon how much you deploy, will touch every employee in the company. So a full talent management system has a suite of modules that cover everything from the initial upfront application process and recruiting process and onboarding, through learning, through succession planning, performance management, workforce planning, analytics. There's a compensation. There's a full suite of functionality, and obviously the more that you deploy, the larger the footprint. And again, if you are an energy sector company, you have a significant portion of your workforce that is not particularly computer savvy. So how usable is it? How intuitive is it? How much training does it require? These are the kinds of things that are critical to really look at when you're evaluating and selecting this technology, as well as making configuration decisions on how you're deploying it. Within these companies, because there is such a close attention to the position control and the workforce and managing to your budget, many of my clients, one of the main drivers behind putting in a talent management system, one of the key things they focus on is its workforce planning, analytics, with a significant portion of the workforce that may be reaching retirement age, being able to analyze where the competency gaps are going to start to appear, where we're going to lose skills, what we're going to need to plug in based upon that type of attrition, and being able to plan for that and deploy appropriate succession planning and performance appraisal functionality is critical. So I find oftentimes with my clients that these are the main drivers when it comes to the modules that they're looking for when they deploy within this particular sector. I do have some clients, though, that are in the nuclear industry, and as nuclear energy suppliers and people who maintain nuclear power plants, et cetera. One of the key things for these organizations is being able to really assess where the organization is at from a regulatory perspective, and are the employees from a certifications and skills and licenses and renewals, managing all that. So one of the key things that many of these companies do look for on the LMS side is the ability to really provide an easily accessible and usable learning management system that ties in well with employee development to help develop that internal talent. So again, just one of the drivers that we see quite common within this industry. Compliance and audit reporting are almost every organization that I work with in this sector lives in constant fear or worry about being audited and to be found to be non-compliant, and to lose, not only to incur the extensive fines that come with that, but also to be in a situation where they might actually lose the license to be able to even operate within a region or a country. I have one client that is a coal mining organization, and they identified that if the kinds of fines that they can receive if they are found to be non-compliant can actually they measure it in terms of how many tons of coal they would need to mine just to pay off these fines if they were to get them. And so for them, it's absolutely critical that their vendor understands the kinds of regulations that are in play, that they understand the kinds of restrictions that are enforced within various regions around the world, and that they bring expertise to the table as well to ensure that their systems are compliant, because these fines can be crippling if encountered. And so when kicking the tires of talent management systems, we advise our clients to certainly take a good hard look at what kind of expertise they bring to the table. Do they have other clients that are in your sector that have gone through and been able to withstand audits and be able to get the information out that's needed? So very critical area. Another area that's critical from a technology driver perspective, as we draw to an end, is how well can these vendors stand up to the stringent security standards that are demanded by energy providers. Again, if you're an organization that, for example, is in the nuclear industry, there are very, very stringent standards around record retention and data security. And because these talent management systems solutions providers are most frequently SaaS model, they're housing your data. They're housing your global data have they passed the necessary tests and scrutiny and certifications that are critical to be able to prove that, yes, your data is secure. Very important within this industry. The final item that I would like to mention is because many of these energy companies are global in nature, and because they're often working in areas that are remote and working with a workforce that is oftentimes not computer savvy and not multilingual, it's really critical that, especially if you are a global company in the energy sector, that you have a solution that really is strong on the multilingual front. Being able to render to your employees or your candidates, if you're deploying a recruiting component as part of your TMS solution, being able to deploy to them a solution that they can read in their native language and they can understand is critical for successful system adoption. So these drivers, I think if you look at them as a whole, again, they're individual ones can apply across any type of organization, but as an energy sector company, these would be the types of drivers that would really come to the forefront when looking to evaluate and select a solution to manage your workforce and talent successfully. And with that, I've completed my presentation, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, Tiffany.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. And we have had a couple of questions come in. So as a reminder to everyone, if you do have a question, please feel free to use your question pane in the GoToMeeting system, and we'll get those over to Brian. But Brian, the first question that we received is, from your experience, what do you see as the biggest challenge when putting in a talent management system?
Oh, okay. I'm a firm believer that, and this isn't just specific to the energy sector, but I've been putting in systems for the last 15 years, and I believe that the biggest challenge is not the technology. It's the culture. It's the people. And when you look at the energy sector and you look at some of the characteristics of this sector, to me, the thing that would stand out the most that I would want to address as quickly as I could is just the culture and the change management that is going to be necessary to deal with the inertia, to deal with the resistance to technology, the resistance to doing it a different way. When you put in one of these systems, you want to move towards standardization. You want to be able to have a process that makes sense with as little variance as possible, although there obviously will be some variance. And as I mentioned this earlier, just as you begin to dig in and find out what you're dealing with, and it's amazing how much is out there that has been built and nurtured and just maintained to support particular unique problems in certain areas. And now you're going in there and saying, we're going to do it a different way. So the technology really is not the problem. It's getting people to come to an agreement on how we're going to move forward and deploy a system that's going to enable us to globally, across the organization, manage our talent. And so to me, that's the biggest challenge. And I can't emphasize enough how important it would be to make change management a critical part of your deployment strategy, and to again, because you're dealing with a workforce that is resistant to some extent. I mean, nobody likes change, and there's always going to be resistance. But if you fail in your deployment, it's going to be so much harder the second time around. So doing the upfront work to really understand the nature of your organization and to identify what are the key risks from a culture and an organizational perspective that are going to potentially or could realistically derail us from what we're trying to do, and putting your change management structure in place to address that is critical.
Excellent. Yeah, and this question, this next one really kind of goes along with that global implementation. And the question is, what would you recommend when developing a project team for a global implementation?
Besides the obvious change management and making sure you have that as part of your project team, I think one of the biggest mistakes that companies make when they put together a project team, especially if they're global, but even if they're domestic, just within the United States, you do have the field, and the field is out there. And the biggest mistake that I see is companies make decisions at the corporate level without really engaging the region or the field. I see this with companies. It's particularly evident to me when I work with global companies, and I see the unwillingness to really meaningfully engage people from overseas. We'll have them on calls, but we won't really take them seriously enough that we're willing to actually fly them in to be part of the sessions where we're defining what we're doing and how it needs to work, or we won't go out to them. And this is difficult, again, because of budget concerns as well, because that all adds expense. But I have clients that their largest operations are actually overseas, and I encourage them to, if that's where your future is, and that's a critical component of what you're doing, meet them on their turf. It adds cost to it. Yes, it does, but the cost is worth it because of the level of engagement, the communication to the field or the regions overseas that they are true stakeholders and partners in what you are doing is worth the expense. In doing this, because they become much more engaged. They're not just disinterested voices on the other side of the world, or you've taken the time to meet face to face, and that communicates a commitment to them that is going to pay off down the road in significant fashion. So building into your team structure the representation at a face-to-face level from the field, to me, is critical. And if you don't do that, you run a risk of having a disengaged project team that ultimately says this is just another project run by corporate that gave us kind of lip service that we were really important.
Oh, very good. And obviously, with this type of project, there's a lot to think of. And we are at the end of our time, so if anyone has any other questions, we'll be sure to get those answered and back out to you. But with that being said, as a reminder, we do a ton of these projects, as Brian has mentioned in his various examples of working with clients. So feel free to reach out to us if you're going through a project now or preparing to. You can reach out to us via our website, and that is hrarchitect.com. Our confirmation or our contact information is all listed on there. So with that, thanks to everyone for attending today's presentation. And Brian, thanks so much for providing us with such valuable insight.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.